welcome to Crime Clueless. We're your hosts. I'm Jenna.
And I'm Lara.
I'm Krista.
And I'm Kayla.
How's everybody doing?
Good. I'm ready for another case.
This one will make you question everything.
Oh, I'm kind of excited about that.
Mm-hmm.
Nice intrigue, Jenna.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you guys have heard of it before or not. So
I think that's
You'll
a
have to
better
let me know.
start than, hey, you guys are going to hate this one.
yeah, I don't think you'll hate it. And it's solved.
Yay.
Yay.
All right. Let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Sometimes the evidence seems clear, the suspect obvious, but then, piece by piece, the truth starts to unravel. What was once a simple case turns into something far more twisted. Lies are told, lives are destroyed, and the justice system is tested. This is the story of a woman whose murder sparked a chain reaction of deception, a wrongful conviction, and a tangled web of manipulation that would take years to untangle. Before any of that, before the investigations, the arrests, and the shocking betrayals, there was just a woman named Betsy. A woman who was full of life, deeply loved, and had no idea she was at the center of a deadly game.
Ooh, that
Mhm.
sounds really interesting.
Yes.
The intrigue.
Yes.
Yeah, amping it up. Who was Betsy Faria? Elizabeth, or Betsy as she was called, was born in 1969 and grew up in the small town of Troy, Missouri. She was the kind of person who could light up a room. Always smiling, always finding a reason to laugh, Betsy was known for her warm personality and her ability to make others feel welcome, no matter where she was. Betsy was more than just a loving wife and mother. She was full of life. She had a vibrant personality that made her a natural entertainer. For a while, she worked as a DJ, bringing energy and music to events, making sure people had a great time. She loved music, laughter, and any opportunity to brighten someone's day. When she wasn't spinning records or keeping the party going, she worked in insurance, a stable career that allowed her to provide for her family while staying connected with people. Betsy had a way of making even the most routine interactions feel special. Whether it was a client at work or a stranger on the dance floor, she had warmth that people remembered. Betsy met Ross in the late night.
I'm sorry. Betsy met Ross. Betsy Ross.
It should be Russ.
Okay.
But I think that, that's what I was thinking, Betsy.
Ross, this is Russ. Russ, this is Ross.
Yes. Betsy met Russ in the late 1990s, and from the beginning, their relationship was full of laughter and adventure. Russ, a movie-loving, big personality kind of guy, was drawn to Betsy's infectious energy and kindness. The two became inseparable, sharing a love of road trips, family gatherings, and simple nights in with their pets. Before she met Russ, Betsy had two daughters, Leah and Mariah, both born in the 1990s. Being a mother was one of the most important parts of her life, and she poured her heart into raising her girls. When she and Russ married in 2000, she embraced... Sorry, I am struggling with Russ. If it said Russell, it would be easier.
Mhm.
When she and Russ married in 2000, he embraced his role as a stepfather, and the four of them built their life together. Their home was filled with love, the usual chaos that comes with raising teenagers, and always laughter. Through all of life's up and downs, they were a team. Life wasn't always easy for Betsy. She faced challenges, some big, some small, but she always tried to stay positive. One of her biggest battles came in 2010 when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. It was devastating news, but Betsy approached it in the way she approached everything: hope and determination. She had surgery, she underwent treatment, and leaned on the support of her family and friends to get through those difficult days. One of those friends was a woman named Pam Hupp, a woman Betsy had met through work, someone who seemed to be caring and a helpful presence in her life. Pam often offered Betsy rides to chemotherapy and spent time with her as she recovered. She was always there for Betsy. After months of grueling treatments, her surgery, and so much uncertainty, Betsy received the news she had been praying for. She was finally cancer-free. It was a moment of relief, of joy, of reclaiming the life that she had fought so hard to hold on to. To celebrate, Betsy planned something she had always dreamed of, a Caribbean cruise with her closest friends and family. For Betsy, the trip wasn't just about a getaway, it was a symbol of everything she had overcome. It was about a fresh start, a victory, a way to soak in every moment with the people she loved. I think she ended up having 22 people go with her on this cruise.
Oh, wow.
She had a lot of family and
Awesome.
friends that were really excited to celebrate with her.
That's
Mhm.
great.
That's
Great that she
awesome.
had that support.
Yeah.
Mhm. On the cruise, they made memories that would last forever. Russ, her daughters, her best friends, her sisters, family, they all joined her, setting sail for an adventure filled with sunny days, tropical beaches, and plenty of drinks with little umbrellas. During the trip, Betsy was radiant, full of energy, completely in her element. She even got to swim with dolphins, which had been on her bucket list. She laughed with friends. They took in the beauty of the ocean, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude after everything she'd been through. She finally felt like she had made it to the other side. But life had other plans.
Mm.
Not long after her celebratory cruise, Betsy's worst fear became a reality. The cancer was back.
Oh, no.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's awful.
And this time, the diagnosis was even more devastating. The breast cancer had returned and spread to her liver, making it far more aggressive and difficult to treat. Doctors told her that it was terminal, though with treatment, she could extend her time. Betsy, ever the fighter, refused to give up. She began another round of chemotherapy, determined to spend as much time as possible with her family. The chemo treatments were grueling. Each session drained her energy, leaving her weak and exhausted. But even on her worst days, Betsy remained determined to live life fully. She surrounded herself with people who lifted her spirits, Russ, her daughters, her family and friends, all making sure she never had to face a moment alone. During this time, Betsy had to rely on the kindness of those around her, including friends who offered rides to treatment or simply sat with her when she needed company. The outpouring of support reminded her that she wasn't in the fight alone. She had people who loved her, who would do anything to help her through this battle. Despite the prognosis, Betsy didn't let cancer define her. She still made time for movie nights, road trips, and laughter-filled evenings with loved ones. She wanted her girls to remember her not for someone fading away, but as the same fun-loving, bright, warm mother they had always known. And in those final moments, no one could have imagined that cancer wouldn't be the thing to take Betsy's life. On December 27th, 2011, it was the Tuesday after Christmas, a time when people were still winding down from the holiday rush, settling back into their routines. For Betsy, it was a day like any other. She spent part of the afternoon at her mother's house, visiting with family. Betsy was in good spirits, laughing, enjoying time with loved ones. She had just returned from spending Christmas with Russ and her daughters at her mother's home in Lake St. Louis. And while she was fatigued from treatment, she was still the same Betsy, full of warmth, always putting others at ease. Betsy had had a chemo treatment that afternoon, and at some point during the day, a friend stopped by and snapped a photo of Betsy smiling, sitting on the couch. No one knew it at the time, but it would be the last photo ever taken of her alive.
Mm.
As the evening approached, Russ planned to head out for his usual Tuesday night routine, a game night with his friends. He had done it every week for years, a small escape where he could decompress, joke around, and take his mind off of everything for a few hours. He texted with Betsy throughout the day, making plans to pick her up later that night. At some point in the afternoon, Betsy arranged for someone else to take her home instead. It wasn't anything unusual. She sometimes got rides from friends when she wasn't feeling up to driving herself. She sent Russ a message, letting him know she already had a ride and she'd see him later that night. That was the last message Russ would ever receive from Betsy. Sometime after 9 p.m., Russ arrived home expecting to find Betsy in bed resting. Instead, what he walked into was something out of a nightmare. His wife, the woman he had just spent Christmas with, the woman who had been bravely fighting for her life, was dead. At 9:40 p.m., Russ dialed 911. His voice was panicked, frantic, and almost incoherent as he struggled to explain what he had just found. He said, "Oh my God, no. My wife killed herself. Oh my God." The dispatcher tried to calm him, asking him what had happened, but Russ was in a full state of shock. His words tumbled out in gasps, his breath ragged and uneven. She's dead. She's dead. She killed herself. Oh my gosh, she's covered in blood. The 911 operator pressed for details. Was she breathing? Had he tried to perform CPR? Russ could barely process what he was being asked. No, she's cold. She's cold. There's blood everywhere. She's been stabbed. The realization hit him mid-call. This wasn't suicide. This was something else. No. Oh my gosh, somebody killed her. She's been stabbed. She's been stabbed. His voice was a mixture of horror, confusion, and disbelief. Russ had come home from game night with his friends, expecting to see Betsy, and instead he found her collapsed on the floor, covered in blood, brutally attacked. He did what anyone would do in the situation. He called for help, for someone to come and fix what couldn't be fixed. Within minutes, police and paramedics arrived at their home, but it was already too late. Betsy was gone. In the chaos of...
Sad.
It's so
I can't
sad.
imagine coming home to find that.
I know. I was just thinking through that in my brain. I'm like, don't think things like that. Oh, that's just terrible.
Yeah.
So awful.
I know, it chokes me up a little bit. It's
Mhm.
really sad.
Were their daughters somewhere else?
One was actually living with Betsy's sister at the time,
Okay.
and the other had her own place. They were older now.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Mhm.
They were born in the 1990s,
Yeah.
early 1990s.
Yeah. So I
And
think,
this is 2011.
yeah,
Okay.
I think the older one was somewhere between 18 and 20, and I think the other one was like 16.
Okay.
Okay.
They're around our same age.
Mhm.
Yeah. In the chaos of flashing lights and radio chatter, police officers took their first steps into the crime scene, and something else was already happening. Suspicion was beginning to form. As first responders stepped into the Faria home, they were immediately met with a gruesome scene. Betsy's body sprawled out on the living room floor, soaked in blood. At first glance, officers noted that she had been stabbed multiple times, way more than would be typical in a suicide or even a crime of passion. The sheer violence of the attack suggested something deeply personal, something fueled by rage. Russ, still in shock and hysterical, was pulled aside by officers. His clothes were clean, no blood on him. His hands weren't cut, and he showed no signs of a struggle. But something about his reaction made investigators pause. He was distraught, yes, but was he too distraught? It didn't take long for police to start forming a theory, and to them, it was the most obvious one. The husband did it. That same night, December 27th, 2011, Russ followed what should have been a rock-solid routine, one that left him really with an airtight alibi. But despite multiple witnesses, timestamp purchases, digital records confirming his whereabouts, investigators seemed determined to make his evening fit their theory. So let's walk through the actual timeline of Russ's night, the one that really should have ruled him out as a suspect entirely. At 4:30 p.m., he left work as usual and drove home. He and Betsy had been texting throughout the day, making plans for the evening. Initially, he was going to pick her up from her mom's house, but later Betsy let him know that she already had secured a ride home. Russ didn't think much of it at the time. Betsy often got rides from friends, and she told him she'd see him later that night.
He was at game night with his friends, right? For like the entirety of it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So shouldn't that automatically be like, no, it wasn't him?
They're all lying.
You would
That's what I
think,
thought
yeah.
too.
All of his friends, they're all lying.
Everyone's lying.
Mhm.
Always.
That's that's okay. Maybe let's open up some other avenues.
Mhm.
Just a thought.
You would think. At 5 p.m., Russ stopped home for a little bit. He changed his clothes, relaxed for a bit, and then headed out to his friend Michael's house for their usual Tuesday night game night. He had been attending these game nights every single Tuesday for years. At 6 p.m., he stopped to get gas at a Conoco gas station. He also bought cigarettes and a bottle of Snapple. His credit card provided a time-stamped receipt proving that he was at the gas station at the exact time. Surveillance footage even captured him at the counter, showing he was alone, calm, and not in a rush. He arrived at Michael's house at 6:30, where he was joined by his usual group of 4 close friends. They did what they always did on Tuesday. They played board games, watched movies, joked around, and just hung out. Throughout the night, multiple people saw him. He never left the house. He was relaxed, normal, and behaving like himself.
And she was at her mom's house?
And then she got a ride home.
Yeah. I'm failing to see where the alibi isn't checking out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
At 9 p.m., he stopped at Arby's. He used his credit card, which again gave him a timed stamped receipt. He arrived home around 9:30. It took Russ 25 minutes to drive home. When he did, he found Betsy on the living room floor. At 9:40, Russ made the 911 call that would change his life forever.
Yeah, that's definitely not enough time to, at least in my opinion, drive home and decide to do something like that and then call. Like that's crazy.
This timeline should have cleared him.
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
all are thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His evening was documented, routine, and it had multiple layers of proof. He had his credit card receipt from Arby's. He had 4 alibi witnesses at game night. He had his purchase at the gas station with surveillance footage. And it was a long enough drive home where it was impossible for him to have committed the crime within the estimated time of death.
Wow.
Despite all of this, police never truly considered the evidence. Instead, they picked apart minor inconsistencies in his statements, they twisted his words, and they built a case that didn't match the actual timeline.
That's a great use of resources.
Right.
Isn't it?
Cool.
Because from the moment Russ found his wife, he was never viewed as a grieving husband. He was their prime suspect.
I think also with them, the police thinking that he overreacted, he wasn't expecting it. Like they knew the end was coming because his wife had cancer, but to walk in and find something like that when you're preparing for her death some other way, I mean, I would overreact too.
Right. Well, and what it said on the 911 call was that he thought it was a suicide at first
Yeah.
and then realized that it wasn't.
Yeah, as he's getting down, seeing if she's cold or not, if he can
Yeah.
do CPR.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd be freaking out. How do you not overreact in situation like what? You walk
Yeah.
in, oh no.
And it's
Well, let me call the cops.
Yeah.
And who's to say what's overreacting, you know?
thank
Yeah.
you.
Maybe that's how he responds to your loved one being stabbed multiple times
And finding them.
and
Yeah.
finding them.
I feel like that sounds like a regular response.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they'll pick it apart either way. It's either not enough of a response
Yeah.
or
Too much. Mhm.
That's awful.
Yeah.
Especially when he has that tight of an alibi
Yeah.
Mhm.
to then be, okay, my wife just was killed. I have an alibi with 4 friends who I've been with and all these things, and you're still not even letting me mourn. You're calling me the suspect.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, and a lot of times it is the husband, a lot of times it's their partner. So I get investigating that as a lead, but as soon as, okay, here are multiple ways to corroborate his alibi,
Mhm.
like let's move on and try and figure out who else it could be.
Yes.
Brilliant. Only.
If only.
I mean, and
Wow.
if he hadn't have stopped for gas or gotten cigarettes and a Snapple and wasn't on that, didn't have time-stamped receipts,
Yeah.
had gotten something to eat at home instead of Arby's. Okay, but you've got,
Timestamps,
yes,
witnesses,
yes,
video cameras.
yes.
Okay.
Really, from the moment that authorities arrived, they're thinking that Russ's behavior stood out. And not because he seemed guilty, but because he was, quote unquote, too emotional, too dramatic, too frantic. Instead of shutting down in shock, he sobbed, he threw himself to the ground. Detectives felt like it was exaggerated and maybe staged.
Oh no,
That's
men
sad.
showing emotion.
I know.
The
How
worst
dare
thing.
they?
Yeah.
His wife was just murdered and he was upset. He must be the murderer. Like what? What?
Oh.
What are we doing?
Yeah.
It's wild. It's wild.
Mhm.
And not just that, there was the 911 call. Initially, Russ had said, "My wife killed herself," before realizing that she had been stabbed dozens of times. Spoiler, over 55 times.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Investigators questioned, how could he have thought this was a suicide?
Well, you walk in and you just see blood. So it's like,
And then you call. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, in one of our other cases, when she was killed by an axe, they thought it was a suicide by gunshot.
Mhm.
right.
So,
Yeah.
Most people don't see something like that every day and know what to look for.
Well, and if he hadn't got close up to look at her, I
mhm.
mean,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
she's covered in blood. You're not
Mhm.
going to see stab wounds from across the room.
And I
No.
think your brain doesn't want to think
No.
murder.
And if you're looking at her, not
Hmm?
looking for
Inspecting.
that.
Yeah. Yep.
And then when they said, check her if she's cold, can you do CPR? Then he noticed and he says that.
Mhm.
Right. Right.
Wow.
Then the timeline. Russ had a solid alibi. He had spent the entire evening with friends, playing games. He even had the receipts. Detectives still weren't convinced. They started picking his story apart, searching for any inconsistency they could find. Their top things: why had he immediately assumed suicide? Why was he the one to find her? Which is stupid.
Yeah.
Why did his
Because he
emotions,
lives there.
right, seem too much? The evidence hadn't even been fully analyzed yet. There was no murder weapon found in the home, no proof that Russ had any blood on him. There was no sign of forced entry, but to police it seemed too convenient. A husband coming home to find his wife brutally murdered, a crime scene that felt so personal, so they jumped to wild conclusions. And within hours, before they had even fully processed the crime scene, Russ was in handcuffs.
What?
He was no longer a grieving husband. He was now a suspect in his wife's murder.
That's
So
awful.
sad.
It's so awful. From the moment investigators stepped in the Faria home, the scene was brutal. Betsy had been stabbed 55 times, blood pooled around her body, staining the carpet, splattering nearby surfaces. The level of violence was extreme, far beyond what would typically be expected in a crime of passion or a domestic dispute. But as investigators combed through the scene, several key forensic details emerged, and they did not support the idea that Russ was the killer.
Surprise.
Surprise, surprise.
Number one, the stabbing was overkill. Betsy had suffered 55 stab wounds, including defensive wounds on her hands and arms, indicating that she had fought back against her attacker. There was something even more disturbing, though. Many of the stab wounds were clustered around her neck and chest, and some appeared to have been inflicted after she was already dead. This suggested a highly personal attack, but not one that fit Russ's profile. This level of overkill is usually seen in cases where the attacker has a deep-seated personal motive or an obsessive connection to the victim. Number two, the blood evidence was all wrong. One of the biggest red flags, there was no blood on Russ. If he had stabbed his wife 55 times, there should have been blood spatter on his clothes, his shoes, hands, face. When police arrived, Russ was completely clean. His clothing had no blood stains, and the forensic testing found no traces of Betsy's blood on him. How could he have committed such a violent hands-on murder in a very limited time frame and left zero forensic evidence on himself?
Well, and especially if people can corroborate, like, yeah, those are the clothes he was wearing at game night.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
On the surveillance camera.
Yeah,
Yes.
that too.
Yeah.
Because that's visual proof, right?
Yeah.
So obviously he
Exactly.
didn't change.
So they assume that he came home, got naked, killed her, and then put his clothes back on.
What?
Mm-hmm.
As
Oh.
one does. What?
Sorry.
Okay.
I mean, like, you're so reaching here.
Wouldn't have made more sense to be wearing like some coveralls or something that you could,
But then you got to get rid of it instead of just a shower.
well, just burn it somewhere. I don't know.
Police,
In
Yeah.
the 10 minutes he had.
right?
he also had time to stab her that many times and shower and get redressed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Speed
Yeah.
D.
Speed
Gonzalez.
demon.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Speed demon killers.
We need to make an image of that. Can you make that, Krista?
Of
A naked
of
murder?
naked murder.
No, a speed demon killer.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Oh,
I was like, wait.
It's too graphic
Which-
for
Yeah.
No,
our blog.
speed demon killer. It's a good band name.
Naked
Yes.
speed demon killer.
Yes.
Put him in coveralls.
Okay. Yes.
Yes, the coveralls.
I'm picturing just like a Tasmanian devil.
Yeah, yeah. Like the
Yeah.
tornado. Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh, so good. Okay. Police did find a pair of Russ's house slippers in the bedroom. They had Betsy's blood on them, but there was a problem. The slippers were completely clean on the bottom.
Hmm.
If Russ had worn them while stabbing Betsy, there would have been blood on the soles.
So he took off all his clothes and put on slippers. What?
And didn't move at all. There's no
and
blood
cut
on the bottom.
Yeah.
Okay.
It appeared like it had been transferred onto the fabric. Maybe like it
Interesting.
was staged.
I feel
Ooh,
like if
intriguing.
these cops would have just stood in a circle and discussed what we just did, they would have realized how
This makes no
asinine
sense.
this is. Yes.
Yes.
Oh, wait.
asinine. I
this
like that
doesn't
word.
work.
No.
That doesn't actually make sense. Maybe we should let this guy go. Yeah.
Let him grieve his wife.
Yes. And look for the actual killer.
And you have to go do that alone in prison.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh,
So sad.
So awful.
That is terrible.
It's not fair to him.
Mm-mm. There was an extensive search, and police never found the knife used in the attack. Russ's home had plenty of kitchen knives, but none of them matched the wounds. This suggested the killer either brought their own weapon or took it with them when they left. If Russ had been the murderer, why would he go through the trouble of disposing of a weapon but leaving every other piece of quote-unquote evidence behind? Medical examiners estimated Betsy had died sometime between 7 and 9 p.m. At that time, Russ was at game night, 4 witnesses, then captured on gas station surveillance, and he was nowhere near the crime scene. If Betsy had already been dead before 9 p.m., Russ physically couldn't have done it.
Mm-hmm.
All of these forensic details should have cast doubt on Russ's guilt, but instead of following the evidence, investigators ignored the red flags and doubled down on their theory.
And wasted precious time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, years.
Years?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you said this wasn't going to make us mad.
No, I didn't.
Oh.
I said it was
No.
solved.
We'll get there
Years.
eventually. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awful.
Mm-hmm.
They also found when they came back in later on, because they had missed it the first time, they came in with luminol to test, and they found blood on only the drawer that the towels were kept in, meaning whoever did it knew exactly where to go to clean off themselves or whatever it was.
Clean off the weapon, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Hmm.
Detectives and investigators claimed Russ had been in a blind rage, not saying why, had killed Betsy, then gone to game night like nothing had happened. But the forensics told a different story, a story where the killer wasn't Russ at all.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How far away was the Arby's from his house?
That's a good question.
Yeah, we have witnesses that she was there while he was somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes I wish there was just some more common sense out there.
That would be nice.
Yeah, but here we are.
So the Arby's was 25 minutes from Russ's home or 25 miles.
Okay.
So however long is like 24.6 miles.
Okay.
Russ walked into the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office as a grieving husband, but within minutes it became clear the detective sitting across from him didn't see him that way at all. From the start, the questioning wasn't about what happened to Betsy. It was about what Russ had done. Tell us what happened tonight. Russ, still in shock, repeated the same story. He'd had game night with his friends just like every Tuesday. He had receipts and multiple alibi witnesses to prove it. He had texted Betsy. He thought she was already in bed when he got home. But the detectives weren't buying it. Instead of consoling him or focusing on finding the real killer, they started pushing the tiniest inconsistencies, looking for anything that could turn his story into a lie.
And this is when he needs a lawyer.
Mm.
As soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
You read your Miranda rights?
Yep.
Yeah.
As soon as you realize they think you're a suspect.
Mm-hmm.
Even before that, honestly. If they're asking you any questions.
Yeah. And, at first, Russ tried to cooperate. He
Mhm.
answered questions. I mean, he didn't think that he was a suspect
Yeah.
because he had his alibi. He had his
Yeah.
time-stamped receipts.
Yep.
When you're so obviously not
Mhm.
the killer,
Yeah.
I mean, you probably wouldn't think you would need a lawyer.
Yeah.
Right. He answered their questions. He went over his evening step by step. The more he talked, the more detectives twisted his words. They pointed out his 911 call. Why had he said that Betsy had killed herself? They questioned his reaction. Why was he so emotional one minute and calm the next? They pressured him, telling him they had evidence, even though at this point they had barely processed the crime scene. Hours passed, and Russ went from devastated to exhausted and angry. He could tell in that moment their minds were already made up. Then they said, "Russ, we know you did it." The detectives didn't dance around it. They told him outright, "You killed your wife, and we have the evidence to prove it." Russ refused to confess. He begged them to check his alibi, to talk to his friends, to look at the timeline. None of it made sense. They weren't interested. In their eyes, case closed. Already had their guy. They kept him there for 24 hours of interrogation.
Oh,
No sleep, no food, no
What?
lawyer.
Wow.
Mhm.
Did he ask for a lawyer?
I don't think so. I don't know.
Okay.
At the end of the 24 hours, Russ was charged with first-degree murder.
wow.
He walked into that room, a broken man who just lost his wife, and now he's being charged with first-degree murder.
That's so upsetting.
Mhm.
Yeah. Despite all of his alibi and timeline and even the forensic evidence, Russ was formally arrested December 28th, 2011, just one day after finding his wife. The police weren't looking for any other suspects. In their mind, case was already solved. When Russ was taken into custody, he was still in a state of shock. I mean, just having found your wife brutally stabbed and murdered,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and now he's being treated as a murderer. Russ,
That's so upsetting.
it's
Mhm.
so upsetting.
Yeah.
He wasn't, well, this will make you more mad.
Oh, lovely.
He wasn't just arrested, he was paraded around in an orange jumpsuit, shackled at the ankles and wrists as if he were already a convicted man. He kept telling them, "I didn't do this. Please look at my alibi, look at the evidence." But they weren't listening. Instead, prosecutors moved quickly to put together a case against him, preparing for a trial that would shock everyone with just how bad the system had failed. Russ had a cousin who got him a defense attorney who I think did a fairly good job, but so many parts of this trial are going to make you scream. His trial was set for November 18th, 2013, nearly 2 years after Betsy's murder.
2 years later.
Has he been in prison this whole time?
Yes, ma'am.
Wow.
He didn't have bond or bail set or anything.
Mm-mm.
That's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How sad.
Ugh.
Mhm.
And if he was offered it, it was way too much
Yeah.
that he could never get.
That is so upsetting.
Mhm. Yep.
Wow.
Despite having a rock solid alibi, no blood on him, no murder weapon, forensic evidence that didn't match, the prosecution was determined to convict him. With no physical evidence tying Russ to the crime, the prosecution did something deeply troubling. They built their case on character assassination rather than facts. And actually, some of the evidence they did have was never brought to trial and was hidden from the defense. They painted Russ as an angry, abusive husband. They claimed he was controlling and violent, despite having zero history of domestic abuse, prior complaints, anything from the daughters, the friends.
Mm-hmm.
They introduced witnesses who had never seen abuse firsthand, but were willing to speculate for the prosecution.
Oh, so nice circumstantial evidence.
Mhm.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And I think, if you're a really good friend of Betsy's or even a family member and they're telling you, we have the evidence, we know he did this, but we need a little help. We need you to testify about his character just to really seal the deal. We have everything else.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mhm.
That is troubling.
Yeah. The prosecution focused on Russ's initial statement, how he first said Betsy had completed suicide before realizing she had been stabbed. This they used to try to suggest that he was trying to mislead police. They ignored his alibi, despite 4 friends confirming he was at game night the entire evening. The prosecution implied he probably killed Betsy, staged the scene, and then went to game night. I think they also subtly tried to say that his friends could be lying because they're his friends.
Wow. I have
They-
like no words.
I know.
Wow, and upsetting.
Yes.
Right.
Really is. They introduced a motive with no proof. Prosecutors suggested that Russ was angry about Betsy's illness and the financial struggles that came with trying to pay for her medical bills.
Wow.
There was absolutely no evidence of marital problems.
You're right. There's no words besides wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. They ignored the fact that Russ had everything to lose from Betsy's death while someone else had everything to gain. The most damaging part of the trial wasn't just what the prosecution said, it was what they kept hidden. They never told the jury that Betsy had recently changed her life insurance policy, giving $150,000 to someone else.
Ooh, the intrigue.
They never introduced testimony that pointed to another suspect, someone much closer to Betsy in her final weeks. They didn't allow forensic experts to testify about the problems with the crime scene evidence. The deck was only stacked against Russ, and he didn't even know it.
Yeah. Who gave her a ride home?
Yeah, exactly.
Probably the killer.
Yeah. Person who would have last seen her. Yeah.
Maybe we should be detectives. What city is this?
We'd do a little bit better than these people did.
Yeah.
We're armchair detectives.
Yes.
This was Lincoln County in Missouri.
All right. Well, got some new jobs.
Yeah. So like I mentioned, on November 18th, Russ's trial officially began. The prosecution was confident. The media had already turned Russ into a villain. Despite the huge gaping holes in their case, they presented him as a cold-blooded killer.
So sad. Wow.
Russ took the stand in his own defense, pleading with the jury to look at the evidence, but the prosecution had done too good of a job making him look guilty. It didn't matter the case against him was built on speculation and zero proof. It didn't matter that the real killer was still out there, because when the verdict came in, Russ's nightmare wasn't over, it was just beginning. Get this. On November 21st, 2013, after 4 days of testimony and just a few hours of deliberation, the jury came back into the courtroom. Russ sat at the defense table, his heart pounding. He had told the truth. He had an airtight alibi. He knew the forensic evidence did not match him, and yet deep down he already knew what was coming. The judge turned to the jury. Have you reached a verdict? The 4-person stood and delivered the words that shattered Russ's world. We find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder and armed criminal action.
Oh,
Russ's...
So sad.
Yeah. It is.
Makes me so angry.
Yes.
It's not fair that the system can go like that.
Yep. That's why lawyer first.
Mm.
Always.
Yeah.
Well, and
Even
it's
if you're
so-
totally innocent.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Like some of the other ones we talked about, they get off not guilty
Mm-hmm.
for things that they, I don't know.
Or
Yeah, like-
people that should be subjects that aren't.
Yeah, like Patty.
suspects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Patty, yep.
Oh, yes.
Yep.
Russ's friends and family were stunned. They knew Russ was not capable of that. They were whispering in disbelief, how could this have happened? The evidence pointed away from Russ, not towards him, but it didn't matter. Russ was in complete shock, his face blank as the words sank in. Guilty. It felt impossible. At his sentencing in December 2013, the judge handed down a devastating punishment: life in prison without the possibility of parole, an additional 30 years for armed criminal action. Russ was led away in handcuffs, his life completely ripped apart for a crime he did not commit. His stepdaughters, Leah and Mariah, were both without parents, one murdered and the other wrongfully imprisoned. While Russ sat behind bars trying to make sense of it all, the real killer was free, and she wasn't done yet.
Ooh.
Despite the flimsy case, there was no effort to look for another suspect after Russ's conviction, or even the 2 years that he sat behind bars. No deeper investigation into Betsy's final weeks. No one seemed interested in the fact that Betsy had changed her life insurance beneficiary just days before her death. Outside the courtroom, some people were asking questions. Russ's family and friends refused to accept the verdict. His defense attorney, Joel Schwartz, knew something wasn't right. He could feel it. Russ had been framed. But by who and why?
Yeah, if she changed the beneficiary,
That's a
shouldn't
huge
that
red
be-
flag.
Yeah, shouldn't that be a question? Hey, who is this money going to?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's this one. Ugh. It just is so infuriating
Mm-hmm.
that they didn't look into any of it. And they kept it from the jury intentionally. And they kept it from Russ's lawyer.
Is that illegal or no?
Seems illegal.
Yeah.
Seems like it should.
Like I thought you were
be.
supposed to share evidence
You are.
between both. Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought.
Yep.
I'm
Well,
always
I
thinking.
guess if they deem it not relevant, maybe it
Yeah.
wasn't evidence in their eyes, I guess.
That's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
how about that's exactly what they decided it was? They weren't going to bring it into court, so they didn't need to share.
Right.
Russ, wrongfully convicted, locked away for a crime he didn't commit, refused to give up. From the moment the cell door closed behind him, he knew one thing: he had to fight. As he sat behind bars, his supporters never stopped believing in him. His friends, family, defense attorney, they knew the evidence didn't add up. There were too many holes in the prosecution's case, and most importantly, there was another person who should have been investigated, someone close to Betsy. But the police and prosecutors had already made up their minds, and they were not interested in reopening the case. If Russ wanted justice, he was going to have to fight for it himself. Joel Schwartz immediately filed an appeal pointing out, 1, Russ had an airtight alibi. 2, the prosecution, he found out, had hid key evidence. 3, the crime scene forensics did not match Russ. But in 2015, so for 2 more years, the Missouri Court of Appeals denied his request for a new trial.
Wow.
Then, fortunately, later on in 2015, a higher court ruled that Russ deserved a new trial.
Oh, good.
Yes. The judge found that critical evidence had been improperly excluded during his first trial, evidence that clearly pointed to someone else.
Yes.
This time, it would be a bench trial. No jury, just the judge deciding Russ's fate. And this time, the full story would come out. At Russ's second trial, that's when you put Joel Schwartz into one word. Schwartz.
Schultz.
At Russ's second trial, Joel Schwartz didn't just focus on proving Russ's innocence, he went after the real killer. For the first time, the court heard about the life insurance policy. Just 4 days before Betsy's murder, she had changed the $150,000 policy from Russ to her friend, Pam Hupp.
Why? You'll get into that. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I know. It's like, don't do that.
No.
Don't do that. Pam, the court found out, was the last person to see Betsy alive.
So that's who drove her home.
Yep. Pam had given multiple conflicting stories to police. Pam told investigators that Betsy wanted her to have the money to take care of her daughters. But spoiler, Pam never gave them a single cent.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, Pam to take care of Pam's daughters or to take care of?
To take care of Betsy's.
Okay.
I mean, not to murder me and then take care of them, but
Yeah.
if something happens and my cancer doesn't go away.
Right, but I still feel like their stepdad would be the better person anyway.
I think she had convinced Betsy that she could set up a trust for them and she was so money savvy and she would make sure they got even more.
Mm.
This information changed the case in a real way. The judge saw what the original jury never got to see. The police had tunnel vision on Russ and ignored the person who had everything to gain. On November 7th, 2015, so nearly 4 years after this happened, after spending 4 years in prison, basically, Russ was finally exonerated and set free.
Good, finally.
Yes.
Yeah, 4 years. Can you imagine?
No.
He walked out of court a free man, but the fight wasn't over yet because while Russ was fighting for his life behind bars, Pam Hupp was out there planning her next move, which would be deadly. While Russ was sitting in prison for this crime that he didn't commit, Pam was out in the world living her life as if nothing had happened. In fact, she was doing quite well for herself.
She stole all of Betsy's daughter's money.
Yeah, $150,000 is great.
Yeah. She collected that payout, and despite telling people that she would set up that trust for Betsy's daughter, she never did. She kept every penny for herself.
Wow, that's
With-
terrible.
There's a special place for people.
I agree. With that money, she and her husband moved into a bigger home in O'Fallon, Missouri, living comfortably while she played the role of a grieving friend. And while the police and prosecutors continued to defend their case against Russ, Pam seemed untouchable. Pam could never keep her story straight about the night Betsy died. Every time she retold it, there were new details and contradictions. And then in 2013, Pam's mother mysteriously died. When she was questioned about the money that she did not give to the girls because they had tried to go after her for it, she is on video recording saying, "Well, why would I need their money? My mom has a bigger life insurance policy. She has Alzheimer's and is in a rest home. And when she dies, I'll get that."
Pam's mom?
Mm-hmm.
And then
So-
Pam's mom also mysteriously dies.
Just kind of outing herself there.
Yeah.
Yeah, she had that planned way in advance.
Yeah. She is not the smartest criminal. Although she gets away with a couple for a while.
Yeah.
On October 31st, 2013, Pam's mother was found dead outside her third-story apartment at a senior living facility. She had apparently fallen from her balcony, landing on the ground below. At first, it was ruled an accidental fall, but there were a few red flags. Pam's mom's name is Shirley. Shirley had 8 times the normal dose of Ambien in her system. Pam was the last person to see her alive. She had visited her mother that day and left in a hurry. A staff member at the facility said Pam made a comment about her mom, quote unquote, not being around much longer while she was there that day. And Pam told the staff that she wouldn't be coming down to dinner. And also, don't count on her for breakfast tomorrow.
What? And no one was like, why?
Right. Nope.
Okay.
And despite all of these red flags, no charges were ever filed, and her mom's death was ruled accidental.
So we're dealing with multiple geniuses.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. Also, the bars that are on the balcony were broken off. Like, instead of going over them, she went through them.
So like someone pushed her, maybe.
Maybe.
Oh.
Or loosened them. And it's makes me rage.
And this isn't like something that happened a long time ago. This is like 2013, you
Mhm.
said? Yeah.
12 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not like in the 70s or 80s or, you know.
Yeah. When there's like not much evidence. Anyway.
I don't like this.
No.
Okay. Despite all the concerns, all the red flags with Shirley's death, no charges, nothing. And Pam moved on. She had gotten away with Betsy's life insurance money, and now her mother's death conveniently left her with another larger inheritance. In 2016, when Russ's wrongful conviction started really making headlines and getting out everywhere, because that was at the very end of 2015, Pam started panicking. People were finally looking at her. And Pam, yeah, right. And Pam was not about to let that happen. So she made one final desperate move. At the same time, Russ now fully exonerated, the police were finally re-examining Betsy's case. The new investigation had one clear suspect, Pam, and Pam knew it. She could feel the walls closing in. She had avoided suspicion for years, but now detectives were questioning her again. The press was digging into her past, and Betsy's murder wasn't just going away this time. Pam stages a fake home invasion. One designed to make it look like Russ was trying to silence her, and in doing so, she killed another innocent man. On August 16th, 2016, Pam lured a man named Lewis, who had some mental disabilities and also physical disabilities, to her home under false pretenses. She told him that she was a producer for Dateline NBC, offering him money to act out a crime reenactment. They know all of this because Pam tried to do this to another woman first, who came forward after she saw what Pam did to Lewis, or that he was killed, and she saw her. Mm-hmm. So Pam had driven up to her house, gave her the same story, asked her to come with her, told her she couldn't bring her phone. And then they went to get in the car, and Pam noticed some kind of video doorbell and freaked out, told her it was off, and went and got in her car and drove away.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. After Lewis got into her car, she drove him to her house and then called 911. As the dispatcher listened, Pam said that there was an intruder. Then she shot Lewis 5 times, claiming that he was sent by Russ.
Mm-hmm.
She planted a fake note in his pocket, trying to make it look like Russ had hired him to kill her.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's the theme of this story. Wow.
Yes. Fortunately, this time, police didn't just take her word for it. Surveillance footage from a nearby trailer park showed Pam approaching random strangers, trying to lure someone into her car for hours before she found Lewis.
Wow.
That's so sad for Lewis.
Mm-hmm. For the first time, Pam Hupp was arrested for murder.
For 3 murders?
Yeah. In 2019, Pam took an Alfred plea, which means that you're not admitting that you're guilty, but you've accepted that the prosecution has enough evidence to convict. And so it's kind of like saying you're not guilty, but it's like pleading guilty without pleading guilty.
Mm-hmm.
Pam, every time I say that, I think of The Office. Pam. For years, Pam had lied, manipulated, and escaped consequences, and now she was behind bars. And yet there was still one more crime she had gotten away with, Betsy's murder. In 2021, with Pam already in prison, prosecutors finally charged her with Betsy's murder.
So 10 years later.
10 years later.
Wow.
So was she in prison for Lewis's murder then?
Yeah.
Okay.
So still never for her mom's. Right. Pam Hupp now faces trial for the crime that she thought she got away with. If convicted, she could face the death penalty. Where things stand now, Russ is free, but lost years of his life behind bars. Actually, he met the woman that went forward saying that Pam had approached her when they were digging into this case, and those two are now together.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah. Pam is serving life for one murder, waiting trial on another. Betsy's daughters, unfortunately, never got the money she left behind. And justice, though delayed, is finally catching up to Pam.
Her poor daughters.
Mhm.
So she hasn't been convicted.
Not
or-
yet. I was just looking and it doesn't look like it's gone through yet.
Okay.
I mean, so much longer than like we talked about with some of the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Unlike the 2013 trial, which wrongfully convicted Russ, the new case against Pam is built on solid evidence that was ignored the first time around. Here's what prosecutors now have against her. Betsy changed her life insurance policy just 4 days before her murder, removing Russ and naming Pam as the sole beneficiary. Pam was the last person to see Betsy alive. Pam told multiple conflicting stories about her interactions with Betsy that night. There was no physical evidence linking Russ to the crime, but Pam had clear financial motivation. The scene appeared staged, especially the bloody slippers found in Russ's closet. The similarities between Betsy's case and the later murder of Lewis, which Pam was convicted for, show a clear pattern of manipulation and deception. With Pam already serving life in prison for Lewis's murder, prosecutors are seeking the death penalty for Betsy's murder. Pam Hupp's trial for Betsy has been delayed multiple times as her legal team tries to stall while she sits behind bars. While Pam continues to deny her involvement, prosecutors believe they finally have enough evidence to convict her. But even now, sometimes there's one lingering question. Did Pam act alone? Some people believe others knew what she was doing or even helped her cover it up. After all, the police and prosecution were so determined to convict Russ that they ignored a lot of clear evidence pointing to Pam.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's so sad. Like, if they had actually looked into other people, they might have found, her bloody clothes, or if they could have found
Mhm.
blood on her. Maybe they would have found the murder weapon if they would have looked into her sooner.
Yeah, that's a lot of time to get rid of all
Everything.
evidence.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2 other people would still be alive.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
I mean,
You never
she
know.
wouldn't have killed them on her
Yeah,
terms,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so that is the case of Betsy Faria and Pam Hupp.
That was
A roller
very-
coaster.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's just, it's so frustrating to just see the tunnel vision like that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, hiding the evidence from his lawyer, he
Yeah.
doesn't even have the ability to object or try to make sure it gets put in front of the jury.
He doesn't have the time to look into Pam because he doesn't know about that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Maybe if he had all the evidence, their
Mhm.
team could have investigated into her and found something.
Well, there's no way to
Absolutely.
refute hidden evidence,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Awful.
It's so awful. But
We'll have to keep an eye on her.
yeah, I was
Trial
checking to see if it had changed, but I didn't see anything. So
Well, thankfully he was exonerated.
Yes.
Mhm.
Terrible that it took so long, but it's good that they kept trying, kept pushing for appeals, and finally got a judge to listen.
Thank
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it could have been 20, 30 years. It could have
Yeah.
been the rest of his life before.
Yeah.
It could have been, he could be waiting in there now, waiting for her.
Right. For hers to move forward.
Yeah.
Thank goodness. All right. Well, we would love to know what you think, your thoughts on this case. If you would share with us, send us an email, crimeclueless@gmail.com, or on any social media platform. We'd love to hear from you. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube. We're at Crime Clueless on all of them. We'd love to hear your thoughts, theories, feedback. This case is definitely a roller coaster. I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
There are some good documentaries, books, and articles about this case. If you're looking for any of the resources used in this episode, head over to our blog. You can find it linked on our website, crimeclueless.com, under the contributors section. All right, guys, remember, refuse to be clueless, careless, or caught off guard.
Not today, murderers.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Was this one made into a series too? With Renee Zellweger?
Didn't watch it, but it
very familiar. I think I looked up the story when I saw that. Yeah, the thing about Pam.
That's what it is.
Louise Zellweger came out in 2022.
Recent.
Now I have bad feelings about